check that, and then I put the link to the most recent event in there. Okay, so I'm showing we're online on Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn, and we're moving to Twitch.
I see you on Twitch.
Okay. I'm showing us live on my LinkedIn. Let's see. That's episode 4. That's still episode 4. Episode 3. Cool. So I'm showing that we are live on the event as well. Hey, everyone. Welcome. As you all know, we're just going through making sure everything works properly here, and we've got all the streams up and running. So if you're in the event, please bear with us.
Okay, YouTube is good on my end. I'm
Cool.
watching YouTube.
Okay, yeah. So I'm showing that we're live. Let's see. I'm just trying to get to your profile, Vlad, and see if you show as live as well.
I'm going to share the links, by the way, for all the medias on the event.
Perfect. And that anyone who is watching us on LinkedIn, there should be a chat button where we can use that to chat back and forth, if that's how you guys have found us.
Thank you, Frank. Looks like he's already connected on LinkedIn.
Hey, Frank. Thank you, as always.
Okay, I've got the links up, so that should be in the event in case anyone wants to share them or, send to any of their connections. We're live on all of the media. What do you think, Dave? Shall we proceed or doing some last checks?
Yeah, no, I think it looks good. I think everything looks good. We've got everything up. Perfect. Awesome. Vlad, do you want to, would you like to kick off episode 3's intro, or would you like me to?
I'll do it. So welcome, everyone. This is episode 3 of the Manufacturing Hub, in which myself and Dave go over some of the topics in manufacturing we've discussed up to this point, our experience. In the last episode, we talked about the careers, the job market, how to ultimately upskill yourself for manufacturing. And today we've got 4 very big and I think ambitious topics that we wanted to discuss, which are going to be IoT. We've got preventive maintenance, and then we've got AR, VR, and last but not least, big data. So as you can see, Dave's already wearing his headset, and I don't know if you want to make that the first topic or go into IoT.
I was actually going to say, can we make it the first topic? So for anyone who is listening live, I am currently wearing an HMT1 by RealWear. I'm wearing it on my head. There are a bunch of different configurations that you can have, including on the hard hat. But for anyone that hasn't worn them, they're actually kind of heavy and not something that I necessarily want to wear for the whole stream. And so if we can start with augmented reality and virtual reality, I think that would be a great place to kick it off.
Well, I certainly think that you have a lot more experience in that domain based on the headset that you're wearing. I've personally only experienced it a couple of times at the automation fair, not even, the one that just passed, but the one in 2019, where Rockwell Automation presented, their, I believe the name is like Vuforia Chalk. I don't know if that's the right.
Yeah.
And I think they had released like a trial version or a reduced price cost version for the entire 2020, which I had kind of applied for, but I never actually got Vuforia Studio in the end. So I didn't have that much of an opportunity to practice. I think it's still, I guess, again, like just personal opinion, I think it's still fairly early on to kind of see applications in augmented reality. but I think there's going to be quite a few benefits as that technology matures. But I still think that it will be driven primarily by like the gaming industry, to make that a lot better. But I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on it, Dave.
Yeah, so I've been following augmented reality, virtual reality in the industrial setting fairly closely, at least for the last 4 or 5 years. And for a while, I was very much in the mindset that you are, Vlad, of I think we're some number of years away. I think what PTC has done with the Vuforia suite, the chalk and the expert capture in particular, are very interesting. And between that and kind of everything that's gone on with the pandemic, we're certainly pushing what we thought was going to happen
Hmm.
much sooner. And so a little bit of a couple of I've done a couple of projects in AR and VR, and I've done a couple, or at least know a couple of other companies that are doing some very interesting that are doing some very interesting things. And so I guess I guess it was about 3 years ago. I did a project inclusive of what we're basically calling mixed reality, right? It's taking augmented reality and virtual reality, kind of slamming them together. And we kind of built all of that on an ignition perspective platform that we then used to help kind of push the rest of the project along. And it was a landfill project, and one of our partners at the time actually took a drone. They do a lot of drone services, so they flew the entire landfill, and then they went out and they uploaded it all to a Pix 4D, which basically rendered it into this complete 3D model, which, as we were going to help push the pilot project to the next 28 facilities in this county, they then literally took like a HoloLens and allowed everyone in the boardroom to be able to walk around the facility. And
Okay.
there was like projections and pushes to be able to like basically take SCADA information, so like temperature of the flare station and pressures and other things like that, and actually overlay those into the 3D environment to give you the mixed reality. And so that was a very interesting project. I think we won a Firebrand Award at ICC, I guess a couple of years ago on that. And so it was an interesting project. It worked well on the marketing sales side. And I think that we could certainly see more of that moving forward. I think that it's still very, very early in the industry as to projects like that, or people willing to commit the money to actually do that for all of their facilities. And
But
then go ahead.
sorry, sorry, I was gonna ask just so I understand like the use case well. So what you're saying is that they permanently, I guess, made that facility in the virtual environment, and then you could monitor the facility like from, I guess, anywhere, but that was like an ongoing thing, or they wanted to create something for, structuring the site, or what's the like, I guess, what's the use case exactly in terms of like long-term usage?
So the use case was more we have done a bunch of these upgrades, inclusive of some SCADA, inclusive of some ignition perspective. How can we show what we've done to the people that sit in a boardroom? And so
Oh,
it was kind of an add-on service of the partners did a lot of drone services. Because they did a lot of drone services, they took the drone out, they flew it, and then they used some other services to render out this virtual reality environment. And then kind of the laying over of the SCADA, it was similar to like the concept of geotagging, what was very much like just a test to show them that we could do it. I was not involved in the rest of the project. I am not sure, and I honestly wouldn't think that it was a bought for the rest of the project. It was more of a
gotcha.
use case to show people what the entire project looked like and
Hmm.
was inclusive of.
What I guess what are your thoughts on the maybe a traditional production floor level like application? Because I know, and again, like this is purely from what I've seen thus far, but there's a lot of push in the, I guess, the training arena, right? So
Mhm.
you should be able to perform certain, let's say, like maintenance tasks, whether it is, I don't know, replace a motor, or even, look at a certain pulley, for example, and can kind of like show you here are the components, here's what potentially breaks, show you a lot more information. Like, do you see any of that coming into play, anytime soon? And if so, like, how successful do you think in terms of like ROIs, maybe that maybe if you can even kind of talk
Yeah.
about that?
So I'm doing a project with one facility, taking actually potentially some of these headsets onto the plant floor for their electricians and instrument staff, so that they can have all of their maintenance manuals, they can have all of their events and cause logs, they can have, I mean, inclusive of like your entire Microsoft environment on a headset like this, so that if you have a problem, instead of saying, okay, I have a problem with this motor, and then going to a computer that is probably a static computer, or going to the physical books to look for it, instead of all that back and forth, you have the ability to call it up with your voice and
Mm-hmm.
go through and look at that. You can pull out and look at schematics. It's actually extremely interesting. You can build workflows on these now. And so I think all of that is valuable. I see kind of a shift between going for headsets like this and going more towards that traditional iPad. I think that a lot of the older subject matter experts, I think a lot of the people who aren't comfortable, calling out exactly what you want a headset to do, would be more comfortable with a traditional tablet on the floor. So I certainly see a push
Mm-hmm.
towards that. There's a company, I actually know them fairly well, based outside of Atlanta, called IQ Agent, and the owner, Bob Meads. He was actually the first person that introduced me to AR VR. He put a HoloLens on my head 5 years ago and went and tapped around. We all looked like idiots. We were at a bar, so it was appropriate at an event. And so I've been following those guys, and those guys are very much the QR codes, and everything has a QR code. You can scan the QR code, you can pop up the instrument and other information that you have and need from those. And I think we're certainly seeing a lot more of that catching on, and I can see that being extremely valuable to go troubleshoot or be able to blow out schematics of very specific items. And then kind of talking ROI, a lot of the ROI knowledge that I have is based off of kind of what I see the PTC Vuforia people talking about. And when they go through a demo, they've got this very large Excel spreadsheet that they talk about, man hours and cost per man hours and cost for downtime. I
Right.
think that there's a very quick and like very large return on investment. And
Hmm.
because of the quick and large return on investment, I think we're going to see more and more people pushed towards using things like that. And especially the Vuforia Chalk and the Vuforia Expert Capture. I think that as we lose subject matter experts on the plant floor, we're going to need to find some way to empower the people who are actually on the plant floor. Or as we potentially roll into more lockdowns, every country is different. I know Canada, lots of the UK are very much locked down. It becomes less of the question of, okay, how much would it cost to get this person to get on an airplane and fly here or drive over here? And it could very much be can they physically do it? Can they legally do it?
Right.
And so at that point, it becomes okay, well, what if I can get someone to hold up their iPhone and basically FaceTime back and forth, and the other person can be there and they can circle the thing and they can walk them through exactly what they need to do. And that becomes that becomes a very inexpensive process to go through and to get a suite like that set up and to get, some $400 iPads set up.
Yeah, and I think that's what you mentioned is kind of the most basic form of augmented reality, right? It could be as simple as like setting up a phone call with just a video chat, and I think that would be extremely helpful. I can, for example, attest to that when I'm troubleshooting machinery and I'm talking to a technician, 3 states across, and he's trying to explain to me what's going on with this palletizer, why the robot is not getting the right amount of boxes, but without actually seeing it and being able to like direct him on what to look at, it becomes very difficult. But no, I mean, like, all good points, and we got a comment from Frank actually that I think like, I've seen this application too. So he says that I did one of these with Raytheon. Main purpose was to be able to examine the machine by moving around it, looking at mechanical assemblies to determine cable routing and etc. So Let me see, there's like a see more. Yeah, so I've actually seen a similar virtual reality room at like P&G had like a site that had that, and they've invested a lot of money into it. But ultimately, what people could do is come in and, for example, you could describe what you wanted a certain piece of machinery to do, and then the mechanical designers could, like, plan something out, and they could present, so you could walk around the machine, so to speak, and someone would control the machine, like, and how it was oriented, and kind of like, take components out of the machine, cancel certain things out. But I think it's like, again, my perspective, that on the plant floor, I think there's still a lot of hurdles, right? And we haven't even dove into the topics of, let's say, like privacy, because ultimately, if if I'm wearing this headset that can film everything, someone can technically get that data, because it is going through the plant network, and be able to like watch everything that I do. And then you get on the legal issues, which, again, I'm certainly not a lawyer, but I could see how, if I look at certain things, or spend too much time, I don't know, looking at something different, and someone goes in and analyzes what I was doing every second at the job, I could see how that could be a problem for privacy issues. And of course, again, safety as well. Like, if you're wearing this headset, and I'm sure that there's going to be plenty of new applications that people are going to find at the plant floor, with these things. And you don't want to be watching something while you're walking across the plant floor. That's the biggest lawsuit that could ever happen, probably, to a facility.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. I'm really curious what what some of these big players are going to come up with. But I'm still thinking 3 to 5 years to see something like really concrete on the manufacturing floor that delivers like an ROI that's concrete, and there's applications and everything works as expected.
No, I would agree with that. And I would say that when I look at applications like this, and kind of all applications that I look at building, it's very much, how can we enable the people on the plant floor? How can we enable the people at the facility to be able to do their jobs with less physical stress on them, easier? How can we get the information to them when they need it, so that they can make better decisions? And so it's very much along the lines of, how can we enable them? And there will certainly be use cases where people misuse equipment, but people are misusing equipment on plant floors now. You run into cybersecurity issues of people plugging in an Ethernet cable and dual homing a computer because they want to get on the internet from an operator station.
Yep.
Or plugging in a PS3 because they want to play Madden on third shift on Saturday night.
Well, I haven't seen that, but
I know people that have walked into that, or worse. And so it's one of those that people are going to misuse and find ways to misuse as edge cases. A lot of this for me is, how can we help take and push some of this on the plant floor to allow people who are going and want to use this to be able to do their jobs in a easier, less stressful way.
No, for sure. And I mean, like, my only comment is that most facilities that I've been to have banned the use of, let's say, cell phones outside of whatever the cafeterias or just the general areas, because of, it's just too difficult to kind of monitor and make sure that people are attentive. So having a requirement of a headset that can potentially display all those same things is a little bit counterintuitive, I guess, from a safety standpoint. But as you said, I think there's going to be a way, right, to like restrict certain things, to kind of minimize access and what have you. So I think with proper measures, it will get there. But let's get on to an even, I guess, from my perspective, interesting topic, and slightly controversial, IoT, Internet of Things. And maybe even the industrial Internet of Things, as we'd call it in manufacturing. But to start off, I guess, I'm assuming most of you are familiar with it, but just maybe get your take on it, Dave. Like, what do you kind of understand when someone mentions IoT? But at the same time, even more importantly, what do you make of it when it comes to digital transformation? And then what kind of benefits do you see IoT bringing to manufacturing? And I guess this has been going on for a while now, but
yeah. So that's good. And I would agree, Vlad. I think most people should understand IoT. I mean, when you can go to the store, or when you could go to stores and you could buy refrigerators that were connected to the internet. That's just kind of a bizarre thing. But basically anything that is now connected to the internet or can be connected to the internet, inclusive of smart sensors and otherwise, is your IoT or your IIoT, your industrial internet of things. And so that is kind of how I consider it. And I would say, the industrial internet of things has been going strong for the last, 5+ years, or maybe closer to 10 since we branded it as IIoT. And kind of even before then, it's very much what sensors can we put on the plant floor? And what wireless sensors are we using so that we don't have to run wires to it? I would say, especially in the last probably 3 or 4 years, we've seen a lot of companies come and install smart sensors with their data collection devices, which, as we were joking about before we went live, is basically just a hardened Raspberry Pi that we've connected some sensors to that we're pushing up to the internet, and it's some sort of cloud solution. And then we're running some sort of diagnostics across it that we may or may not say is, machine learning or artificial intelligence, and it may or may not actually be machine learning or artificial intelligence. You've got your little Dell NUC. Oh,
It's
Edge
the
Gateway.
Edge Gateway.
Beautiful.
That's right. Edge computing. But no, sorry, go ahead.
No. And so I was saying it's one of those things that has certainly been with us for probably longer than either of us have been in the industry. There are probably sensors and other things in my parents' basement that are 20 plus years old. And so it's one of those that IoT has been with us for a long time and is very much kind of the backbone of industrial automation, of manufacturing. It's how we collect the data to be able to make decisions, as we'll talk about in a little bit. But what's your take on it, Vlad?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in the general sense of that term, it's been, like I said, a little bit controversial for me, because I think that at first it started off as a fairly good marketing initiative, and I think there's a lot of benefit to making something connected, obviously for data collection. But I think it somewhat, with again in certain areas with certain vendors, turned into more of a gimmick where everything has become IoT, and that encompasses any device that has any network capability whatsoever. And I think it's very important to kind of figure out the use cases on a facility to facility basis, when selecting some of these devices. And I think one example that I will kind of maybe mention at this time, it's IO Link. And that protocol I think is extremely useful, but it has certain cases in which how to say it, if you don't really leverage that protocol the way it's meant to be leveraged, then it doesn't really matter whether you have it or not, right? So you're paying for a feature that's technically IoT capable, but if you're not utilizing that to save cost on, let's say, maintenance of, replacing those sensors when they break down, then you're not really getting any benefits out of IoT. And similarly, even with data, and we'll get to big data again, that's the same kind of a discussion, but there's a lot of, I feel, how to say it, craze about getting the most data possible and trying to just shove everything into your database, make sure that you can collect it so that at some point you can process it. But the reality, I feel, is that we're collecting a lot more data than we can process and then drive decisions from. And so that's where I think IoT has become over marketed and over leveraged, right? So it depends on the facility, it depends on the use case. And I think ultimately that's why, in my original question, I'm really curious to hear what you have seen in the industry where there has been an application where we've gotten this data and it really helped us solve problem like ABC, versus we've got all these really cool devices, and trust me, I love technology, so I could spend a lot of money on new sensors and stuff, but ultimately for a plant floor it comes down to ROI, right? So what are your thoughts on applications?
So I think that's a really good idea, and I appreciate your calling out IO Link. So there's a company that I've done a fair amount of work with back when I was an applications engineer. We were offering Banner Engineering, and so they do a lot of sensors. Do you know Banner Engineering as well, Vlad? I'm seeing you smile. Okay, so they have a bunch of very interesting like wireless solutions, inclusive of some predictive solutions. And so they do temperature, vibration, humidity sensing at a minimum, and then you can bring this back into a smart gateway, which you can then connect to the internet. And I believe they've got cellular connectivity to some of those that you can push up into a cloud-based solution. Like it kind of hits all of those IIoT. It kind of hits all of those IIoT buzzwords. It hits the cloud, it hits the predictive, and so a lot of that is based upon just your normal science of we're going to measure some vibration of bearings, typically on motors or blowers, and then based upon what that looks like, we're going to be able to track the life of some of these and at least ideally be able to change out and do preventative maintenance or predictive maintenance, if you will.
Have you seen that application? Actually, like, sorry to interrupt, I guess your train of thought, but I'm curious if anyone has seen the application of vibration measurements, because I hear a lot about that. And I've asked a lot of my colleagues, no one has seen it applied at an actual facility. And maybe it's just an industry difference, where food and beverage doesn't use the largest of motors. So maybe the cost is just not there. But do you have any examples where like that was actually a big initiative?
Yeah, so I guess a couple of things. One, I know a bunch of banner engineering folks, and I know that they've done it successfully. I believe they've got case studies out. I've had offers to have some of them sent to me. I just haven't had the right test case to be able to test some of those out. But I have seen an exceptionally large solution. So I wasn't part of this project. It was a conversation that I had as part of this project. And so Emerson offers large vibration predictive solutions for at least for the paper industry. And so I was having a conversation with a mill, and I believe they had like 15 to 20 lines. And on one of their lines, they had like 600 vibration sensors. And they were looking to scale that from one line to all of the lines because they've run the calculations and the cost of them putting all of this in, paying for what I assume is a yearly subscription, and then doing preventative maintenance on this significantly outweighs the downtime cost of some of these actually going down. I would say that when you're doing vibration sensing, it has to be on very high dollar motors, and it has to be on something that we're going to repair as opposed to replace. Like we're not going to put a setup like this on, a $200 motor. But if it's a $30,000 motor and it's going to take 4 days to get a new one, whereas we have a spare bearing, that we can swap out, or we've got a spare whatever that we can swap out and do our predictive and preventative maintenance, then the cost of taking it down for an hour to do that, as opposed to, we're $50,000 an hour in downtime for the entire line, and now we're behind on everything. It becomes a very simple return on investment equation when you get to a lot of these high dollar value offerings. And at least my conversations that I've had with the banner people was very much along the lines of, you have to understand, who you're offering this into, and you're not going to put some of these vibration sensors on the least expensive items. You have to be much more specific as to where you're feeding into.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think while you were explaining, we had two more comments that make sense and that tie into this conversation. So Dan mentioned that he knows a rep from IFM, and I think IFM offers some of those solutions as well. And then we've got an instrument tag that said in the steel mill industry, they always had vibration monitors. So I guess like my takeaway from this is that it needs to be big enough, like you said, it needs to be expensive enough. And ultimately, I think it's also very prevalent in the industries where you really can't stop production, right? Like in food and beverage, and I guess in pharmaceuticals and many others, you can just kind of stop the line and kind of take a break for maintenance. And that happens fairly regularly versus in like a paper industry. And again, I've only been to a couple of those plants, but steel mill, I assume, is the same. You can't really stop production, right? You're just pumping out the product, and stopping would result in a huge loss and ultimately impact on on your production. So yeah, I guess I could see how that would apply. What about some other interesting IoT applications or cases? I think you were on that train of thought, but I interrupted you with the motor question.
No. You're good. You're good. And again, I think it's who runs three shifts, who runs continuous. And sometimes if you've got, a couple of weeks or a couple of 1 week segments to do preventative maintenance, then it becomes less important. I was at a facility that makes aluminum cans for beer. Those guys have like 1.5 down days a year. And yeah,
Wow.
yeah, I know it was a little crazy. But no, and so I think that we're certainly going to see more of those solutions. I certainly see a lot of like IoT offerings that is almost, and I know we talked about MES, manufacturing execution systems, in one of the earlier streams. I almost see a lot of offerings like that are trying to pull the process information away from the plant floor. And I am certainly a little bit tentative about IIoT solutions that are like that, or IIoT solutions that promise that, they're doing machine learning and artificial intelligence. It's like anytime I talk to, I'm gonna make a joke about sales guys because I am a sales guy, and so I feel like I can. It's like anytime a sales guy says, "Oh, we can do this for everything, every application under the sun," you're like, I'm gonna have to dig into this a little bit more and see, like, what are you actually doing? Where are you guys actually at? Do you have the, experience needed in order to actually get there? Or is it just like marketing and sales jargon? So I feel, especially when you get to like the IoT or the IIoT space, if it's not a long-term company, you have to be extra wary and do your due diligence before jumping into a solution that promises to fix everything.
Yeah, and I think also on the cost side, as we spoke before the stream, I think one takeaway from this is you got to be really careful with what you ultimately buy, because there's a decreased, I guess, price on the hardware that is connected. And speaking of the Raspberry Pi that we mentioned at the beginning of the segment, they've released their new version for $4 US, right? I believe it's like 1 week or 2 weeks ago.
I saw
And
that.
like the cost is just continuously dropping, and you can do amazing things with just that one Raspberry Pi versus some of the vendors and maybe some smaller companies will try and sell you solutions that aren't necessarily cost effective, but are also, I would say, like the next caution is closed architecture, meaning that you can't necessarily use them on your plant floor with a wide range of equipment, right? So you're locked in purely into their ecosystem. You can only do very basic features that only work with their hardware and software. And I think that that becomes extremely frustrating for those who may not be aware that that's the case, because as you said, they might be sold on that idea of like IoT connectivity. Here's your beautiful gateway that can send your tags from your floor devices to the network, and then only to find out it's like extremely limited, locked out, and you can't do anything without calling them and getting them on the plant floor, where you're getting billed hundreds and if not thousands of dollars to get support calls. But yeah, it's I think it's a interesting industry. We're for sure going to see more and more changes, and I'm curious to see what's going to come next.
No, agreed. I think that we'll certainly see a lot of people continuing to push into it. I am excited to see all of the startups, especially getting into the hardware space. And I think a lot of them are doing some very interesting work. And I think that we'll certainly see more and more opportunities in the IoT space, software, hardware, kind of along the lines in the coming years, which is certainly good.
Yeah. We've got an interesting comment. So someone says the company I work for now makes a lot of IO Link devices and IO blocks that talk to both PLC for primary PLC IO, plus integrates cloud communications using MQTT protocol and some of the other platforms, which, like, again, I think all those features are great. But I think your manufacturing facility needs to be at a certain stage where they can leverage that, right? Like, even if you're an MQTT broker, for example, with your sensors, that doesn't mean that the factory is going to be immediately ready to receive that data and even process that data into something meaningful. And I think, back to both of our points, you can be sold on that solution simply because it has all these quote unquote IoT features, but you may not always be able to leverage them immediately. And although they might be really good for someone that can, it's not always cost effective for like a specific application. So that's, I guess we can debate this for a really long time, but that's where I'm going to leave it for now. But yeah, really curious to see what's going to happen there. Okay, predictive maintenance. We've touched a little bit on it, but do you want to start us off with some kind of a definition and maybe again some use cases of what you've seen and where is that going?
Yeah, yeah, no. So I like that. So um, I guess the best way to talk about predictive maintenance is what happens before predictive maintenance, right? So like at the most baseline, we have the it's broken, we have to fix it right now maintenance, right? The it's on fire and we need to fix it. And then beyond that, we've got preventative maintenance, which means we're doing things at a variety of cycles of, hey, we know that we need to change this out, once a year. So let's say you've got a wireless solution, it's in a remote site, it's a battery, the battery should be good for 18 months, but you change it once a year just to be careful. Predictive maintenance is kind of that next step of we're pulling and collecting data and we're monitoring, especially a lot of these high dollar value items, so that we can go ahead and do our preventative maintenance before we get to the point of it breaking and then the facility or the line goes down. And in many cases, if something were to break, maybe we have to change a bunch of other items, and it certainly takes longer to fix the broken thing than it does to fix the less than broken thing. But no, and so I guess after I kind of define a little bit about predictive maintenance, I should say I'm super bullish on predictive maintenance. I very much think that it's the way that we're going to go, despite the fact that probably at least twice a month I talk blue in my face about how we should track our maintenance and how we need to do preventative maintenance. I feel very bullish about predictive maintenance, and I feel that as we're taking technologies onto the plant floor and as we're going through the process of expanding many of these offerings, we're going to be able to integrate predictive maintenance programs as we're going through digital transformation and Industry 4.0 initiatives. We're certainly seeing, or we should certainly be talking about predictive maintenance.
Well, what do you see on the specifically? I guess like I want to get into the weeds of this conversation, right? Like let's take some kind of a packaging line, for example. Like what would you see or what would you need as, let's say, the solutions architect to give them a better view of their equipment so that they could perform, let's say, better maintenance and then cut on some of the costs? Like I'm curious about the specifics, I guess, of what your vision would be.
So I guess in my like ideal vision, you're actually having a conversation with the machine builders. And like, let's say we're building a facility from scratch so we can put new equipment in, which is obviously going to be the most ideal case. And then, so hopefully these machine builders should have a good, series of preventative maintenance tasks of what it's actually going to take to keep the machine up and running. And then ideally, you can go beyond that and get a better understanding about how the machines run in your environment, how you're specifically running them. Hopefully, we can again go back to those sensors, bearings, and again, it's back to kind of the basics of what we've talked about in my thought of we need to measure and understand how the machine is running. And if something gets very hot, we can say, okay, this got hot, maybe we need to check the grease on it. Maybe we need to change bearings. Maybe we need to understand what's going on, especially for those high dollar value items. And then it becomes okay, not only are we doing, our preventative maintenance, but, we've got notifications that we may have problems with X, Y, and Z things. And so as opposed to going through the process of waiting until it breaks or waiting until we hit our normal preventative maintenance, we're just going to go through and push up some of those preventative maintenance items. And I think a lot of it is going to be going through the process of understanding, what's going on with the particular machines, again, going and pulling sensor data and other data through. And in my opinion, it's a lot of a mindset. It's okay, we're not going to be the shop that is going to wait until it's broken to fix it. We're going to go out and, prevent some issues, and then we're going to go continuously check the machines and see what we can do to stop it from breaking.
Yeah, like I guess on my side, because I gave this a lot of thought too, based on what I've seen in the industry, and I'd be really curious to see if there's going to be an application where you could pull the data based on cycle times, and I know that's somewhat done through some of the high level like OEE metrics, but ultimately what would be really cool to see is, let's say you have a case packer, for example, right? So
Mhm.
takes the product and puts them in a box and then sends them off on the conveyor. But I think if you could see that cycle timer to be, a variable that you want to keep within a certain range after your VAT or FAT, however you call them, and that slowly starts to decline as the machine wears out, you could essentially not just send alerts, but you could potentially like adjust certain parameters of the machine to see what kind of an impact they would have on like that cycle time. And ultimately you could also see like how it degrades over time, because I think
Mhm.
there's going to be like very fine adjustments where, let's say if your case packer is the bottleneck and it needs to run at like 10 cases a minute, and all of a sudden it runs at like 9.98, you're starting to see this bottleneck. But it's not necessarily like that something is broken. It's just like, let's say your belts are slightly worn out, your pulleys are maybe not as lubricated as they may need to be, like your servos are getting a blimp of your network that's doing some weird things. But I think there's a lot of like value in that, and I think based again like from what I've seen, there's not a lot of that like going on yet. And I don't know if it's a measure of, like you said, I think how do you say it, like attitude towards the
Mhm.
process. But I think as you have these multiple assets, it will become more and more valuable, because you could find like bottlenecks, you could find issues, you could analyze like what's going on with the asset at the production level, and ultimately like figure out what needs to be fixed, and like not only when it needs to be fixed, but like here you're running at like it's that like diminishing returns curve. Like here you're running at like 90%, there you're running like 80, and
Mhm.
like slowly declining, and like when can you do that maintenance? I think
No, no, I like that. And I think that that should be like some fairly simple math, right? If you're pulling in the information, if you can understand cycle times, if you know where you're like, if you know where that line is and call it 10, 10 cases per minute, then it's okay. If I get below this and like maybe you hit 9.95 cases per minute, and then it becomes okay, the next time we shut down, like we're putting another maintenance shift on, and the cost to run at 11 at 10 and a half or whatever the ideal the peak run speed is, like that makes sense money wise. And I think that you certainly can do that kind of in a less industrial, more real life situation. I actually see that on the van. One we're driving, we do oil changes like every 5-ish thousand miles. We get a fresh oil change, and depending upon who's driving, we can average anywhere between 16 and 20 miles to the gallon, mostly depending upon speed. At 65 miles an hour, we're 18-ish miles to the gallon. But as we get closer to that 5,000 point, we're dropping a mile, maybe a mile and a half, because of the oil. And so before we go for long trips, and almost certainly every time we're about 5,000 miles, we go and spend the $50 to get the oil change, because you can do the math and it very quickly makes sense to get, I mean, beyond just the you should change the oil to change the oil, but it very quickly becomes we're actually saving money by
right.
changing
Yeah.
the oil. And I think that's kind of like the next step. Like much of the time, when we again talk about OEE, it becomes okay, like let's first time we're going through this, let's look at the lowest hanging fruit. It almost generally isn't we need to do predictive or preventative maintenance. It may be a variety, but most of the time there are much larger, pieces of hanging fruit in there before it gets to the point of doing maintenance. But once you have that data mindset of like, let's look at that, let's see what the problems are, let's be able to drill in, and maybe you have a person or a team or a couple of power users who do a lot of that, that is going to be information that is basically at your fingertips. And again, it should be a fairly easy calculation once you understand the variables. And once you understand the variables, you're going to ask why I haven't been doing this for the last 5 years or 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes unfortunately from the industry. As Frank mentioned, the custom machine builders are not as interested in, the longevity per se of that machine versus, the design, I guess, of the initial one. So I think they cut costs, and it becomes really difficult for them to create that kind of a maintenance plan and add all the hardware that would be needed. Not only hardware but software as well, right? Because ultimately, these systems, I don't think they could reside in like an edge gateway. It would have to have some kind of a server that collects the data that ultimately analyzes, thousands, if not millions, of different points over time. Because I guess like that's like, I think it's good that you brought up the car industry, right? But that's what the Tesla, the Elon Musk is doing, right? Like he's pulling a lot of data from all of the vehicles so that in the long run, they would be able to create the autonomous driving or self-driving vehicle. But ultimately, you need, I think, a lot of data points to get that done. And I don't know if machine builders get the same volume, obviously they don't as Teslas, but enough of a volume to be able to make those very concrete recommendations. So I don't know if we're there yet, but
so I've had conversations with various machine builders, some very large, some very small. And most of the time, those conversations get to the point of we're going after a low bid. The potential value add that I am offering by adding some of these services could even if it's $5,000 or $10,000, could easily be the difference between me winning this machine build and me not winning this machine build. So machine builders, I find, generally aren't as interested in kind of going down that path of putting them in as an add-on or as a value add, because that's not their business. Most of the time, the facilities that I've worked at and worked with that are interested in that are this is what we're going to do as a facility. Sometimes it is going to be an add-on to the project, or sometimes they're going to demand X, Y, and Z capabilities for any machine that comes through the door so that it can plug and play into their system. And I think it's going to be much more facilities by industry, by verticals, who are going to say, okay, it is such an issue. We can save so much money. We're going to, go and push to do this, and to kind of hammer on a dead horse. I mean, there are lots of facilities that aren't even running basic OEE calculations or being able to go through the process to understand like where they are compared to where they were, cycle time or other things. And if they don't understand that, we're so many steps away from wanting to have some of this functionality built onto to new machines or retrofitted machines.
Dave, we have a question on YouTube about your background. I don't know if you want to give us like a 1-minute spiel. People are curious about what it is that you actually do.
That's fine. So hey, YouTube. My name is Dave Griffith. I am also kind of curious as to what I actually do sometimes. But the long and the short of it is, I've personally been in the industry for the last 10 or so years. I grew up in the industry as well. I've done a little bit of everything, kind of from working at facilities, in warehouses, to working at OEM machine builders, building large facilities. From that point, I worked at a manufacturer's rep distributor, did a lot of hardware work. I ran a systems integration company, focused mostly on the software, like MES, manufacturing execution system level. And now I guess the easiest way to describe what I do is I'm a manufacturing consultant, although I don't necessarily love calling myself a consultant, because you kind of get that eye roll and he's going to come in, tell us we're doing everything wrong, and we got to pay him a lot of money, and then he's going to walk away. I like to help facilities and people, go through those buzzwords, right? That industry 4.0, that digital transformation. And generally I'm working on, a couple or a handful of projects, as well as helping, a couple niche service providers, build their offerings into the manufacturing industry. I like kind of understanding where we are and helping people understand here's where we are and here's where we'll be in 10 years, which is why I'm doing some work on these real-wear goggles, because while they may not be super prevalent today, in 2 to 5 years, I think we're going to have a lot more technology on the plant floor. And I certainly want to be part of that.
Yep.
And then on YouTube, if you guys want to check me out, I've got a personal blog, dave-griffith.com. I talk a little bit about a lot of stuff, digital transformation, industry 4.0, and kind of a bunch of my experiences. So you guys can check that out. And if you've got any questions, if there's any way I can help you, you can feel free to drop me a note online, on LinkedIn, anywhere.
Sweet. Makes sense. What I guess we're a little bit over time, but I still wanted to touch base on our fourth topic. Since we've committed to this, we might as well go to full hour. But big data. So big data, again, I feel like it's a somewhat of a marketing term, somewhat of a controversial term. What are your thoughts? Maybe introduce it with what it is first, and then give us some opinions and insights.
Yeah, I think big data is basically, and I think big data has been around for at least a decade. And like the concept is we're collecting data, we have this data, and now we're going to use this data in kind of the broadest sense of terms. In the industrial community, we see a lot of people using your process historians. So a lot of that is your OSI soft Pi. We see some people using other time series databases. We see a lot of InfluxDB. We see Wonderware has kind of rolled their own, or a variety of different process historians. And so if you're one facility, you kind of take that and you put that in a place that people can use it. If you're in enterprise, you're taking that and ideally pushing all of that up to a data lake almost exclusively in the cloud, and then being able to run some information and run data analytics based off of that. It's kind of once we have clean data in a data lake, we can use kind of our normal tools and our business intelligence tools, artificial intelligence and machine learning, to kind of dig into that further.
Speaking of which, AI and ML, are you seeing some cool applications and seeing some, I guess, projects maybe that you can discuss or disclose with us?
I'm seeing a lot of people talk about it. I've been seeing people talk about it for years. I am seeing very few, I am seeing some machine learning that is actually machine learning. I'm not sure I've seen an actual artificial intelligence application in the industrial ecosystem, mostly because I would say for it to be an AI, it would have to have control, and I haven't seen anyone give a industrial facility control over to the machine for a variety of reasons. Mm-hmm. But I'm certainly seeing more people kind of looking into that, talking about big data and artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think that some of the biggest issues are the fact that the data, it's dirty, right? Like when we set up, at the most basic level, these PLC tags, 10, 20 years ago, it was Dave does it one way, Vlad does it a different way, Jim, Tom, Terry, and Tony all do their own, kind of sort of within some sort of structure, but all slightly different. So it's very difficult. You have to go through and clean a lot of this in order to put a process in place before we could actually look at, running any sort of machine learning or artificial intelligence on it.
Yeah, and if I may expand on that, I think it's not only the differences in programming styles, which of course plays a very big role in getting that data into where it needs to be and ultimately become usable, but also the capabilities I find of many facilities are, as we talked about, just not there yet, right? So I go to many manufacturing floors where a lot of their even PLC systems are not even on the plant network. So it becomes extremely difficult to, to go into those meetings and kind of crush the dreams of, some of the manufacturing leaders when they're just telling you like, hey, we'd like to get AI machine learning into place so that we could manufacture 10x the number of product that we're currently putting out. And they're just not ready. It's not even like a matter of getting the data. They're just not even connected. They don't have the right instrumentation. And again, like this ties back to some of our IoT discussion, where they might need to get certain hardware upgrades, which then come with certain software upgrades, which then come with certain software programming methodologies. And then again, like we can talk on, but there's going to be, protocols that you're going to be using, databases that you're going to be using. You mentioned a couple. And I know certain facilities, again, like depending on the application, would use, let's say, a graph database versus like a traditional SQL database. Like there's a lot of different, I think, like cogs in the machine that, again, may not be applicable and not as generalizable as some of the vendors may make you think. So it's extremely important, and I think it's certainly headed in the right way. But as you said, like I haven't seen any like very specific applications yet. And again, I think a lot of people mislabel what AI is, and I like the fact that you kind of pointed that out, because ultimately, to a very non-technical person, something as simple as controlling the level of a tank based on a sensor could mean like, oh, that's AI, we're controlling the level automatically. Well, like that's not really the definition. So it's a very fine line, I find, between like what marketing says and what is actually delivered on the plant floor. And based on the traditional definition, I haven't seen something that's I guess fulfilling the criteria, for me at least.
Yeah, no, I think those are good points. I have a couple other thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm.
So the closest thing that I've come to people actually using that to run in line is kind of back to that facility that I've been to that makes aluminum cans. And one of the guys in the mill was telling me they were going through a process to kind of pull in all of their process variables. And so as the item is going through the mill, basically they're going to be able to tell the item at any point in time on the line, based upon the process variables, if they continue down that path through like normal running operation, if it will turn out good or bad. With the theory that if it's going to turn out outside of process variables, they can change something as they're going through that process. So
Okay.
but it's basically like a really difficult linear regression, right?
Yep.
And like this might be getting too technical for this particular stream, but like that's not machine learning. That's a linear regression that, if in theory we could run on Excel 5 years ago. And so but seeing things like that is very exciting, and I think that those guys in some instances are certainly like on the bleeding edge of like, let's take data and make sure that our output is good output. I've seen some people kind of do some of that with multivariate well, I've heard of some people do some of that with multivariate analysis in like the pharmaceutical industry, whereas if they're running down the tube of known good, they know that the end product is going to be known good. I think that's because pharma is kind of towards the bleeding edge and there's a lot of money in it. And I would also imagine, especially in some of the mixes, like if you screw it up, you can't melt it down and try again. It's you've screwed it up and it's scrap. And then there are probably different FDA and other food and drug industry regulations that are issues. And the other comment, and I feel like I cannot talk about big data or ARML without talking about Jim Gavigan. He and I have done a bunch of videos specifically on this over the last year. And his best thought about this is actually on YouTube, right? So YouTube has probably the most data and the most viewing data out of literally everything that we want. And sometimes you say that you want to type fishing into the, I want to see a fishing video on YouTube, and it gives you a golf video or a cat video in the top 10. And those guys are literally spending all day, every day, running through the process of trying to create a better algorithm to get you to watch more video.
Yeah. I think Jim is doing a lot of interesting work. I know that he doesn't share all of it publicly, but I've watched the couple of videos that you mentioned, and I think there's a lot of insights. And I think that's part of the reason, I guess, why the industry is moving so slowly, is that there's not enough people to educate about, best practices. And I think ultimately, different sectors, for one reason or another, I guess, confidentiality, are unwilling to share, some of their findings. So even if some manufacturing plant is leveraging AI or machine learning for, I don't know, their recipe utilization, for example, they're not necessarily going to want to share that with the rest of the world, right? So I think that's part of the reason why, also, since it does give you an advantage, it's really hard to kind of find these things. But as you had mentioned, I guess some of those applications, one came to mind. I remember hearing about a chemical facility where they had used a digital twin, which is, I guess, like another topic of Industry 4.0 that we can discuss down the road. But they've used that in conjunction with, the batches that they've collected over the years, and then they were able to reliably kind of predict, if they were going to change the mix, how that batch would go through the process, right? So again, like it's really a multivariate analysis, but I think they're still pulling historical data and kind of like analyzing that. So I think it's at the basic level of like machine learning, but it still kind of is there. But that's one of the use cases that I've kind of heard of, never seen in person, but something to kind of watch out for.
No, I think that's very interesting. And I'll tease it because I know it's coming out soon. There's some interesting multivariate analysis videos that Jim and I shot when we were together coming out on the Industrial Insight channel, I think end of February. And when it goes live, I will mention it on the podcast. And I think it's very interesting. We got pretty deep into a couple of different applications that I think people are going to want to watch. I know it was mind blowing for me. I had heard about it twice before we sat down and walked through it in person, and I think I just sit there with like a stunned look of, wow, we can actually do that. That is so amazing right now.
I mean, I think it would be great to have Jim maybe on the podcast down the road. But if we want to, I think let's close off the current episode with some final couple of words, and I guess I'll start off by saying, thank you everyone who's been watching the show. We're going to be posting this on all the podcast kind of mediums, but you'll also be able to see it again on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitch, I believe, saves the recording as well. There's going to be links and some of the things that I guess how to connect with Dave, how to connect with me. We'll add the links that he mentioned about the videos that Jim has created with him together. So that's going to be all like in the descriptions and the comments. I don't know exactly here, there, maybe somewhere, but they'll be posted for sure. Appreciate all the participation. Appreciate the questions. What are your thoughts, Dave? Are we ready to commit to the next episode? Is that maybe what I'm sensing, or not yet?
Yeah, I mean, so again, I'd like to kind of mirror Vlad's thoughts. Is thank you guys all, anyone who's managed to stay here through the entire thing or even part of it. It's always great to get the live comments. If you guys are listening to us in a non if you guys are listening to us in the podcast, please come watch the stream in almost anywhere that you can watch a stream at this point, which is pretty awesome. I know Vlad and I both feed off of that, and we love answering your questions. I feel good to commit to the next stream. I think we were talking about doing it in 2 weeks, Wednesday the 17th. Is that what you're thinking?
I think we've wanted to commit, I guess, to one day of the week, and I think Wednesday really works well for us as well as many other viewers that we've kind of asked that question. And so this would put us to the 17th, right? February the 17th would be the next one.
Yep, Wednesday the 17th, 6 o'clock East Coast time, which is noon somewhere. And at some point I'll figure out what time zone it's noon in and be able to say noon in that time zone and really confuse everyone.
Perfect. And I think I don't want to give out too many details or like confirm our guest before we spoke to him, but we've got some really exciting people lined up. And our goal, as we had mentioned in the last couple of podcasts, was to bring some subject matter experts that would be able to talk to some of these topics even more in depth than me and Dave would. And so that would make the stream even more interesting. So feel free to come up with questions. Make sure that you tune in the 17th of February, and we'll see you guys at that time. Thank you, everybody, again, and see you in 2 weeks.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.